All the hunters still alive heard Jinwu's voice. Instruments. A ray of hope found its way into the eyes of the hunters. Quite different to back when he told them to kowtow, everyone moved unbelievably quickly. If Jinwu was wrong about this, then as soon as arriving near one, they would be killed by the stone statues holding the musical instruments. However, no one here questioned Jinwu's words. Song was the first one to arrive in front of a statue carrying a musical instrument. Song controlled his heavy breathing and raised his head to look at the statue. And as if it was a lie, the fingers of the statue moved and strummed on the harp. Cling, clang. A beautiful melody flowed out. It's working. Hurry to the statues with instruments. Hunters ran towards the nearest correct statues in hurried footsteps. The statue with a trumpet began blowing it triumphantly, one with a flute began playing with it, the one holding the lyre strummed on its strings. Heek, heek, heek. While sensing the approach of his physical limit, Kim somehow arrived in front of the statue that held a bazooka and plopped down to the ground. TL, I don't know what this bazooka could be. TL'd as is from the raw. ED, probably either a bazooka or a bouzouki, both from the 1900s. Tiring, tring. As soon as the statue began playing the instrument, the god statue stopped chasing after Kim. He must have been overcome with emotions, because Kim then began shedding tears while he stayed down on his knees. Sob. Sob. Meanwhile, the god statue turned around. The creature searched around and soon enough, found its next prey. God d****. Jinwu spat out a cuss as his gaze met the god statues. He then began running hard, so hard that his heart might explode. His back was already soaked through in sweat. Why? Why isn't it working? Jinwu's resentful glare landed on the stone statue in front of him. The statue holding a drum showed no signs of moving at all. Thud. 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 The god statue closed in with frightening speed. He was practically on the other side of the chamber from the d****mn thing, yet the distance between the two shortened in no time at all. Jinwu swallowed down his saliva. Could it be that the statue won't play because there are two people here? Me and Miss Juhui. He couldn't think of anything else. Why? Because other statues were playing music just fine as soon a hunter stood in front of it. There is no time to think anymore. Jinwu put Juhui down and got ready to run to somewhere else. Mr. Jinwu. Still terrified out of her mind, Juhui clung onto Jinwu's sleeve. Jinwu calmly whispered in her ear. We'll both die if we stay together. Tears began forming on Juhui's eyes. Her fingers trembled as they held onto his clothes. Unfortunately, there was no time to explain to her in detail. Jinwu carefully pried her hand away and began running in the opposite direction as hard as he could. Boom, boom, boom. When he glanced back, the statue behind Juhui began beating its drum in a slow but steady rhythm. What a relief. There was only one thing remaining now, to run to the other statue without getting killed. Only Jinwu hadn't received the protection of the music-playing statues. Quite obviously, the rage of the god statue was solely directed to Jinwu and him alone. Jinwu did his best to avoid the foot of the thing that rivaled a building in size and crossed the room in a hurry. Thud. Thud. He fell and rolled around, but still, he somehow managed to avoid getting flattened by the god statue's foot. Heek, heek. He might only have been a rank E, but he was still a close combat type hunter, so his physique came in handy in situations like this. Just a little bit further. A bit more. Jinwu kept an eye out on the god statue's movements and ran even harder. His speed increased. And when the distance remaining between him and the stone statue was mere a dozen feet. No, that's the wrong one. Mr. Song cried out to him. Jinwu had been paying attention to the god statue only, he was stunned by the shout and hurriedly turned his head to take a look at his front. Ah! It's not a statue with an instrument. He belatedly realized that the thing that looked like a musical instrument from afar was actually a shield, instead. And sure enough, the statue mercilessly stabbed down with its shield. Heek! Jinwoo hurriedly threw himself to the side. Kayak! Juhui screamed. Jinwoo rolled on the ground, and when he came to a stop, he raised his head to see the god statue standing right in front of his nose. It's one thing after another. His forehead must have been torn from him rolling on the ground, because blood was flowing down and blurred his vision. His view was restricted and he couldn't look too far away. Jinwoo quickly searched around his vicinity. An instrument. An instrument. However, no matter how hard he looked, he couldn't see a single statue holding an instrument nearby. Meanwhile, the god statue raised its leg over Jinwoo's position. Heek! Thud! Jinwoo threw himself again and somehow avoided the foot of the statue again. But he had reached his limit. A powerful dizziness was assaulting him, and for some reason, he couldn't even balance himself. Please. If there was a real god, he thought that he'd start praying right about now. It was then, Jinwoo spotted a stone statue that held neither a weapon or a musical instrument. Is that? Jinwoo decided to bet everything on that statue. He crawled on the ground and arrived in front of the statue in question. He then managed to flip his body around and lie down on the ground so he could see the god statue. He no longer had any energy to move. Pant, pant. Jinwoo stared at the approaching god statue and continued to roughly breathe in and out. The expression of the god statue was far more contorted compared to before, as if it got infuriated further by Jinwoo's continued evasion. The god statue now stopped in front of Jinwoo. Seeing a creature as big as a high-rise blocking his entire view, Jinwoo felt like he couldn't breathe anymore. Pant, pant. Did it think he was nothing more than a cornered rat? The god statue simply looked down at him and didn't do anything else. This is the end. Jinwoo sensed his own unavoidable death approaching closer after looking straight into the eyes of the god statue. However. Woo woo woo. From somewhere behind him, a beautiful and otherworldly voice came out. Jinwoo turned his head around to see what was going on. Woo woo, woo woo woo. The lips of the stone statue holding a book moved, and whenever they did, a divine song flowed out and filled the interior of the massive chamber. Woo woo woo, woo. The crumpled expression of the god statue slowly reverted back to the emotionless state. Soon, all those horrifyingly contorted facial muscles of the statue smoothed out. When the song of the stone statues came to its eventual end, the god statue turned around. Then, just how other stone statues had done until now, it returned to its throne and settled down as if things that happened until now were nothing but a lie. Thud. The noise of the god statue sitting down on the throne resounded throughout the chamber. Pant, pant. Barely made it. A thin smile formed on Jinwoo's lips. Meanwhile, Juhui began running from her position at the far end of the chamber. Mr. Jinwoo. She ran with all her might and knelt down next to him as tears streamed down on her face. What can I do? What am I supposed to? She summoned all of her magical energy and activated her healing magic. However, nothing seemed to improve. The dispersed hunters gathered around Jinwoo one by one. Every single one of them carried a dark expression. What? Mr. Jinwoo. Even then, only Juhui was crying in sorrow. Why was everyone acting like this? Jinwoo's lips bobbled up and down. He wanted to ask what was going on, but he couldn't really summon forth his own voice. Sensing that he had no choice, he tried to prop himself up. Then, he noticed the pool of blood around his lower torso. Only then did he belatedly realize the change to his body. Ah! Below his right knee was gone. Jin Woo's eyes reflexively shifted toward the stone statue holding the shield. He then saw the trail of blood clearly visible on the end of the shield. And the rest of his right leg was just below that. Drip. Drip. Drops of blood started falling from Zhu Hui's nose. That was the sign of her reaching the limits of her physical stamina. The healing magic from a rank B healer was unable to recover missing limbs. Meaning, what she was doing was basically pouring water into a broken jug. Her stamina rapidly bottomed out in the end. It's fine now. Miss Zhu Hui. You can stop. I'm going to heal you. I'll fix you as good as new. Hunters stared at the two of them while forming miserable expressions. Out of the 17 who initially entered this chamber, only 6 remained now. And from this group of 6, 2 of them had suffered horrible, grievous wounds. Song had lost his arm, while Jin Woo lost his leg. They might have survived, but none of them felt like rejoicing at the moment. It was then, yet another strange noise rocked the chamber. Rumble. The middle of the temple, where that strange magic formation could be found, suddenly rose up above the ground. Jin Woo inwardly thought that it had finally come. Prove your piety, is it? He already had a rough idea as to what those words could mean. Part 5, Final Trial. The circular magic formation in the center of the temple began rising up noisily and only stopped after reaching the height of a couple of steps. An altar. Hunters displayed alert reactions as soon as Jin Woo muttered out. An altar. He just said it's an altar. The person who had rescued them from the 2 preceding crises was not some high-ranked hunter, but ranky Jin Woo, who used to be the butt of their jokes most of the time. If it weren't for Mr. Song, all of us would have been. Hunters were thinking this exact same thought. Under the current circumstances, Jin Woo's words were their lifeline. And now, that Jin Woo had muttered out a word, altar. Kim always was quick on the uptake, and so, he caught on to the meaning first before anyone else had the chance to do so. I get it now. I see how it is. Kim then unsheathed the sword hanging on his hips. Now originally, this weapon would be used to cut various monsters down. But for now, it'd have to be utilized for a different purpose altogether. Even if I'm a dumb B** starred, I can more or less get what you're trying to say here. Hunters nervously swallowed their saliva while looking at the sharp, coldly gleaming blade. Oh Mr. Kim. Why are you pulling your sword out like that? Why don't we talk about this first? Let's talk first. The highest-ranked member among the group, Rank C Hunter Song, was heavily injured, meaning there was no one here that could potentially stop Kim, who boasted a pretty powerful set of skills himself even within the D rank. Kim pointed towards the altar with his sword. The final law, prove your piety. And there's an altar appearing out of nowhere in the middle of this place. Kim's gaze then shifted to Jin Woo. So, aren't we supposed to offer up a sacrifice? Mr. Song. Jin Woo slowly nodded his head. That was what the youth thought as well. One of the surviving 6 had to act as a sacrifice. That's what the last law probably meant. Jin Woo came to this conclusion. He sensed more disturbance and raised his head, and realized that the eyes of Mr. Kim as he approached closer did not look friendly at all. A long sweat drop glided down Jin Woo's forehead. Ajusi. What? You, young man, don't say anything and be still. Kim angrily shouted out and pointed his sword at Mr. Song, who was squatting next to Jin Woo in order to check out the youth's condition. Just who was it that dragged us to this place? Wasn't it this guy? Yes, it was Mr. Song. So, don't you think it's only right for Mr. Song to take the ultimate responsibility? Ajusi. Jin Woo tried to get up in a fit of anger, but then, Song's hand that resembled the bark of an aged tree stopped the youth. Jin Woo looked at Song in disbelief. Song wordlessly shook his head. His eyes were pleading with Jin Woo, asking the youth to not say anything else. Of course, Jin Woo had lots of things to say, but he kept them down for now. Song slowly raised his body up. What Mr. Kim said is right. I should take the blame for today. Old man, I guess we are now finally on the same page. Kim used the tip of his sword to point towards the altar. If you get it now, then let's get going already. Over 10 people died here because of you, old man. One of the dead hunters today happened to be Mr. Park, a personal friend to Mr. Kim. Exploring the dual dungeon was decided with the vote involving everyone, but Kim had already erased that memory off his head after losing much of his reasoning. Mr. Song spoke to Kim. I'd like to walk on my own volition, so can you put the sword away? Of course, Kim refused right away. How can I trust you, old man? Stop wasting time and start moving already. Song sighed softly under his breath and walked towards the altar. Kim pointed his sword at the older man's back and followed on afterwards. Jin Woo bit his lower lip while watching the two men walk away. This isn't the fault of Mr. Song. More than half of the group agreed to do it together. Just because things had gone south, blaming Song for everything was simply too cowardly, he thought. But, Jin Woo unfortunately did not possess enough strength to stop Kim here. Kim, thought to be one of the best among the rank D, and Song Jin Woo, easily the worst of the rank E. The difference in their strengths was all too clear for him to see. Not only that, Jin Woo had even lost a leg. If he tried to confront Kim as he was now, there was a chance that him and even Ju Hui, who had been focusing solely on healing him, could meet with disaster. DMN it. Jin Woo squeezed his eyes shut. He never hated his own powerlessness as much as he did today. In the meantime, Song had stepped up on the raised altar. Suddenly, a red flame lit up near the outer perimeter of the altar as soon as he did. Everyone nervously swallowed their saliva and observed the unfolding situation carefully. However, nothing else happened. Just a single flame came to life, and that was it. They waited for a while but there was no visible change at all. Not only Kim, but everyone else got flustered by this situation. Kim quickly turned his head and spoke to Jin Woo. Look here, Mr. Song. This wasn't it. Jin Woo also shook his head. Even I. He too thought that once a person chosen as the sacrifice stepped up on the altar, the third law of prove one's piety would be completed. It's not about offering up a sacrifice. If so, then it was not necessarily bad news. If the law was not about sacrifices, then it meant Mr. Song could still be saved. Jin Woo's expression brightened somewhat. He sweated bucket loads as he tried to stand up, and two hunters nearby quickly lent their assistance. Please take me closer to the altar so I can study it. Mr. Jin Woo, your injuries are. Ju Hui also got up from her spot to follow after Jin Woo. Her complexion was rather pale after expending too much of her magical energy. But because she had worked so hard, Jin Woo's blood loss had been temporarily halted and the pain he felt was reduced to a barely noticeable degree. I gotta hurry up. The current condition of Ju Hui, Kim's boiling rage, Song's injuries, and the frightened hunters, he didn't have a lot of time here. Jin Woo eventually arrived at the altar with the help from other hunters. Let's climb up on the altar. The two hunters flinched from his statement, but they trusted Jin Woo and stepped up. Then, 3 more flames lit up. Right away, Jin Woo's eyes gleamed brightly. It's the same number as the people on the altar. Mr. Song and Jin Woo, plus 2 others who helped the youth. Indeed, the flames lit up to match the number of people standing on the altar. And it kind of looked like that these 4 flames were drawing a circle outside the altar. If I take into consideration the space between the flames, 2 more will complete the circle. It seemed that all the remaining people had to climb up on the altar for something, anything, to get started. Jin Woo turned his head to ask Song. If we wait here, do you think other hunters will come to rescue us? Song shook his head. Today is the 7th day since the gate showed up. These things will start moving first before the help arrives. Because it's a gate ranked D, I see that it's been left alone for far too long. Well, that's how the association operates, isn't it? A gate would open up fully after the 7th day. The real meaning of a raid was to kill the dungeon's boss monster and therefore close the gate before that happened. When failing to do so, the monsters trapped in the dungeons would be set free from the dungeon and they would be able to roam the outside world. Jin Woo looked behind him. The giant god statue was still looking down on them with an overbearing, arrogant expression from its throne. If that thing manages to go outside, then the ensuing chaos would be unimaginable. Of course, before that happened, hunters coming to this chamber to rescue them would all be killed by the statues first. He was now sure of the fact that they could not wait here forever. Jin Woo called out to Juhui and Kim. Both of you, climb up. Juhui stepped up on the altar first. The hesitant Kim also followed suit soon afterwards. 2 more flames lit up and the circle was now complete. And then hunters were grandly stunned by what happened next. What the hell? What's going on here? As Jin Woo had suspected, yet another change took place. It's coming. From the outermost edge of the altar, small blue flames floated upwards and began drawing a circle of their own as well. There looked to be at least 30 of these blue flames, placed real tightly next to each other. 34, 35, 36. Jin Woo quickly counted them all as the blue flames completed the circle and he realized that there were 36 of them. The 6 red flames that lit up to match the number of people. And the 36 blue flames that appeared outside them. What could be the significance behind that number? It was then. Clang! Without a warning, the resolutely shut door suddenly opened up wide. Hunters reflexively flinched. Yuk! They all wanted so bad to run towards the wide-open doorway, but having seen the final moments of the choirboy hunter, they found it hard to take the first step. If one tried to be the first, just who knew what might happen to them? Everyone's gaze fixed on Jin Woo as if to demand an answer from him. However, Jin Woo's lips remained tightly shut. He couldn't come up with a guess at the moment. He didn't know whether the open door was a trap, or they were now allowed to go out after they upheld the final law successfully. Too bad for him, just as everyone was looking at Jin Woo, a horrifying noise filled up the entire chamber. Creak. Creak. The heads of all 6 hunters quickly snapped around to look. What was that? It's coming closer. Those DMN things are all moving now. Hunters' breathing quickened in an instant. The stone statues that had only moved when a person got near were now several steps closer to the group. Jin Woo only needed a short moment to figure out what happened, of course. No, the statues didn't move. It's the plinths below them that moved. That horrifying screech from earlier on most likely came from the plinths beneath the statues grating against the stone floor. They are not moving anymore. Kim wiped the droplets of sweat on his forehead as he spoke. While everyone was still staring at the statues, Jin Woo's focus was on the blue flames. They had been going out one by one, and 3 of them had flickered out of existence already. Creak. Hearing that screech, someone cried out. What was that? Where did it come from? Jin Woo quickly raised his head. The noise had come from his general direction. The stone statues facing him had moved a little bit closer. Why only my side? Was it because he looked at somewhere else briefly? In order to confirm, Jin Woo closed his eyes. The noise resounded out again. Creak. As soon as he opened his eyes, the noise stopped. What the F***ck is going on here? What are we supposed to do about this? Jin Woo quickly shouted at others. Don't take your eyes off the statues, no matter what. When he thought about it, he realized that the statues first began moving closer to the group when others were busy looking at him. They creep closer when we are not looking at them. It was right then, another blue flame disappeared. However, there was still no discernible change to either the group or the statues. Could it be? Cautiously raising his arm, Jin-Woo did his best not to take his eyes off the statues while checking the time with his wristwatch. As I thought. At an interval of 1 minute, a blue flame was being extinguished. The blue flames are the timer. It was quite likely that one of the main points of the third law was to stay within the altar until all 36 blue flames died out. In other words, as long as everyone was keeping close watch on the statues, they'd be safe until the timer ran out. However, Jin-Woo realized one thing he failed to consider as he watched the statues. What will happen when the timer runs out? It was too early to relax just because nothing seemed to happen as of yet. Jin-Woo took a look at the faces of his companions. They are not going to last until the time runs out. Hunters had all gone pale from fear, while sweat drops continued to fall from their faces like heavy rain. And they couldn't even take their eyes off the statues, so they couldn't confirm the remaining time either. Some were already beginning to look away out of sheer nervousness. Even if we take care of the timer, things will get out of control before it finishes. Jin-Woo's thoughts quickly became complicated. Front, back, left, and right. In order to secure all 4 directions, 4 people were the bare minimum required. Jin-Woo himself, Ju Hui, Mr. Song, and finally, Mr. Kim. A single person leaving now would result in a gap within the field of vision. Kim wiped the sweat off his forehead and asked urgently. Mr. Song, just what is going on here? Explain it to me properly. We'll make it as long as we wait here. Only until all the blue flames are extinguished. Jin-Woo spat out everything he had deduced so far. Kim nodded his head as his ears perked up. Jin-Woo quickly ended his explanation and added one more thing at the end. Remember, everyone here can get out of here alive. The laws of this chamber always left open a path for one's survival. The final law would not deviate from that. Jin-Woo was certain of no one else needing to die as long as the remaining people trusted each other. Too bad, Kim's thoughts were quite different from the youth's. The older hunter asked hesitantly. Look here, Mr. Song, you could be right on this one, but, could the door close shut instead when the timer runs out? Jin-Woo couldn't answer that one. He came to his conclusion after considering several variables, but until the result was in, he couldn't be 100% certain of anything. However, what Kim wanted was a definite assurance. Rather than an uncertain promise of everyone's survival, the definite survival of his own self had proved to be far more alluring in the end. I'm sorry about this, but I don't think I can stay here anymore. Ajusi. Sorry. With that parting word, Kim stepped down from the altar. He then ignored Jin-Woo's urgent calling and ran towards the door. He stopped and looked for a brief moment just outside the door, but Kim did not step back inside the chamber again. Grit. Jin-Woo gritted his teeth. God d****. He had saved the lives of others, but what he got in return was definitely not something like gratefulness or friendship. His entire body shuddered from the pain of betrayal. Just as he suspected, as soon as Kim had abandoned them, a gap within the surveillance had been created. It was impossible for 3 people to guard all 4 directions. And so, the statues positioned in the blind spots began creeping closer to the altar. Kriikak. Krihak. The encirclement of the stone statues was gradually tightening. Song took a look around and then spoke to Jin-Woo and Ju Hui. Both of you, you should leave now. His voice was full of resignation. Jin-Woo looked at the old man. But, Ajusi. Just as Kim had said, I was the one who dragged us all in here. If someone has to remain behind, then it'd be only right that I'm the one. But, still. You two with a better future ahead of you should be the ones to survive today. Song began smiling, then. He was thinking of these 2 young people's hearts as they would have to abandon him here. Jin-Woo helplessly nodded his head. He was uncomfortable about this whole thing, but there was no time left to argue back and forth who should remain in here. Song then tried to ask Juhui to take care of Jinwoo. "Miss Juhui, can you help out Mr. Song here for a bit?" "Why yes." However, just as she was about to prop him up, Juhui plopped down to the floor. "Ah!" Juhui tried to get up, but then, tears began forming around the edges of her eyes. "My legs. I can't move my legs." Both the expressions of Jinwoo and Mr. Song hardened in an instant. Juhui's current physical condition did look terrible even from a casual glance. Her lips were in the shade of pale blue, while her entire body continued to tremble ever so imperceptibly. She was suffering from the side effects of overusing her magic energy when she was already at her physical limit. "Because she tried to heal my leg." Jinwoo felt his chest tighten and couldn't say anything. However, they really didn't have any time left now. Creak. The stone statues were relentlessly approaching them without a moment of rest even now. Jinwoo shoved Song's hand away and plopped down to the ground himself. Seeing this, Song's eyes grew wider. "Why, young man?" Jinwoo spoke up with a determined expression on his face. "Ajusi, please take Juhui and get out of this place." "I told you, I'll be the one staying behind." "In that case, who's going to help Juhui?" It was pretty much impossible for him to take Juhui, who couldn't even stand properly, and leave through the door within the time limit. Of course. There was the other choice of abandoning Juhui behind, as well. However, Juhui had saved his life several times already, and the only reason why she was in this state was because she tried to help him with all her might. He definitely did not want to suffer the guilty conscience of abandoning such a person behind in this godforsaken place. "There is no time left. Please leave now." Song's expression remained hardened as he helped Juhui up. She shook her head desperately while tears streamed down on her face. "No, you can't. Mr. Jinwoo can still survive, you know. Let me. I promised to buy you a dinner, didn't I?" Jinwoo pulled out the rank E magic crystal from his pocket and placed it in her hand. "Please, use this and enjoy one on me. When I get out of here, I'll be coming around to collect the change, you see." A smile formed on Jinwoo's face, prompting Juhui to cry out in anger. "How can you crack a joke in this situation, Mr. Jinwoo?" It was at this moment that Jinwoo signaled to Mr. Song with a nod. The older man then lightly chopped on the back of Juhui's neck. "Ah!" With that, Juhui lost her consciousness. Song picked up the unconscious girl and placed her over his shoulder. "I'm really sorry about this. This is my choice, so it's fine." Mr. Song bowed his head to Jinwoo. With that goodbye, Song quickly left the altar. Kree-hack. Kree-hack. During the time the three of them were chatting, the statues had arrived at the proverbial stone's throw away. Jinwoo got on his knees and took several deep breaths. Fu-woo. Fu-woo. He spotted the sword Kim had left behind next to him. So, he reached out and picked it up. Now that it had come down to this, I'll take at least one down with me. When he looked behind him, Jinwoo saw Mr. Song safely leaving through the doorway with unconscious Juhui still perched upon his shoulder. What a relief that was. Only I'll die here now. He wasn't doing this because of some noble determination to sacrifice himself or anything like that. No, there certainly was an element of him calculating the best possible outcome in his decision. Even if he survived and got out of here today, he would have to live as a cripple for the rest of his life. Obviously, carrying on as a hunter would be impossible, then. And it was also questionable whether he'd be able to live normally as well. He was only a high school graduate, and since he didn't have any discernible job skills, he simply didn't have too many options left to put food on the table. Mom's hospital fees, and my sister's school fees, too. If that were the case, then he might as well make sure his family would receive a better compensation from the association, even if it was just a single cent more. Was the compensation paid out to the family members 300 million won or 400, when one dies during a raid? TL, between $267,000 and $356,000. That was a huge amount for a worthless life of a rank E hunter. Creak. Creak. Clang. Finally, the statues arrived. The first one to arrive climbed up on the altar. Jin Woo glared at it and lifted the sword up. Come. Unfortunately, the expected attack didn't come from the front, but his back. Stab. A long spear penetrated into Jin Woo's back and exited out of his chest. Kiak. Jin Woo spat out a mouthful of blood. An unimaginable amount of pain rushed in like a tsunami wave. If you were stabbed a couple of inches higher, you'd have a hole in your heart by now. Ju Hui's nagging he heard only yesterday popped up in his head just then. Ha! He could only smirk at that memory. What a crazy ending this is. There was no way for him to resist now. When his grip loosened, the sword fell to the floor with a sharp clang. Jin Woo fell down and powerlessly stared at the statues closing in on him. Stomp. Stomp. Statues that were carrying axes, swords, spears, hammers, maces, etc. They slowly surrounded him. Their raised weapons glinted coldly under the light. Stab. Another spear stabbed into him. Thud. A heavy hammer strike smashed into his shoulder. Crack. Kiak. Tears of pain poured out from Jin Woo's eyes. Mom. Gina. The faces of his family members appeared faintly in his head. He so wanted to see them one more time. He so wanted to hear their voices one more time. But, that would be impossible now. Because, he was about to die here. Just like this. Clang. As he was about to black out, a golden light began enveloping his body. Jin Woo was surprised by the weighty voice coming from the corner of the hospital room, and hurriedly turned his head to look. I apologize if we took you by surprise. Unfortunately, we are unable to wait any longer. Two men kitted out in black business suits approached Jin Woo's bed. The youth tilted his head and asked them. Who are you? He had never seen these two's faces before. One of them with the close-cropped hair like a soldier and wearing a pair of sunglasses presented him with a business card. This is who we are. Jin Woo received the business card and read what was written on it. Woo Jin Cheol, the section chief of the Monitoring Division, the Korean Hunters Association. The Monitoring Division was the only department in the Hunters Association with many strong hunters in their payroll. Well, since this department was tasked with managing the country's hunters, so, quite obviously, they would employ many high-class hunters to facilitate that purpose. What does the Monitoring Division want from me? Woo Jin Cheol dragged a chair closer to the bed and sat down. The other man, who must have been his subordinate, stood behind him. The unspoken pressure emanating from the two buff guys staring down in close vicinity was quite heavy. The story they conveyed was rather surprising, though. I was unconscious for 4 days. By any chance, do you remember what happened before you blacked out? Yes, I do. Please tell us everything you can remember. Jin Woo told them everything truthfully, minus the strange hallucinatory words he heard before he lost his consciousness. And that's when you lost your consciousness. Is that all? Yes. I open my eyes next, and I'm in a hospital. Woo Jin Cheol and his lackey exchanged meaningful glances. For some reason, they seemed to be troubled by Jin Woo's lack of knowledge. Actually, Jin Woo was the one who wanted to find out what happened the most in this room. Just how did I get to this hospital? Did a large guild participate and kill those D*MN things? Well, actually. Woo Jin Cheol awkwardly opened his mouth. By the time the agents of the Monitoring Division and the White Tiger Guild arrived at the scene after being briefed by the survivors. The White Tiger Guild was a supermassive guild and also one of the top 5 in the country. The association had recognized the danger, hence they requested the aid of such a huge guild as the White Tiger Guild in the first place. Just what did happen back there? Jin Woo nervously swallowed a dry spit. By the time everything was gone, the only thing to be found within that open space was you, Mr. Song Jin Woo. There was not one trace of the god statue nor the stone statues. Come again. Jin Woo displayed a shocked, disbelieving face. It's hard for us to believe it as well. If there had been any inconsistencies in the testimonies of the survivors, or if we had failed to find the remains of the victims in the chamber, we might have suspected something fishy was going on. Wu Jincheol scratched his chin. It had been 6 years since he got ranked as and started working for the Monitoring Division. He could confidently say that he had witnessed and experienced pretty much everything during his tenure. However, this kind of situation was a first even for him. He had asked other guilds as well as the associations in other countries, but the end result was nothing worthy to speak about. That was why. So, this is what we've been thinking. Wu Jincheol carefully opened his mouth. There were powerful creatures in that chamber, without a doubt. But, they were taken care of by an unknown group, or an unknown person. Because, no otherworldly beings escaped from the gate before it was closed, you see. They had to consider all the possibilities. Even if the odds were low, they had to confirm them all. The head honchos of the association deliberated, and then deliberated for some more, and finally came up with a theory. Wu Jincheol carefully studied Jin Woo's reactions as he continued on. We suspect that Hunter Song Jin Woonim might have gone through another awakening. Another awakening. Jin Woo's eyes shot open wide. Although extremely rare, there had been instances of a human who had awakened his or her abilities as a hunter going through yet another awakening. Often referred to as reawakening, those who undergo this process would normally become extremely powerful compared to before. Originally, once a hunter's rank was assigned at the beginning, it rarely changed. A hunter's abilities were determined the moment one went through an awakening, that was why. However, it was a different story for those going through the reawakening process. Jumping past their own limitations to rise up from, say, rank C to A, or even from B to S, such things had happened before. Wu Jincheol nervously swallowed his saliva. Song Jin Woo. If he went through a reawakening and became a rank S, no, maybe even exceeding that, then it's possible for him to kill those monsters all by himself. The god statue was said to have melted rank C hunters with nothing but its eyes, according to the survivors. If one were able to kill such a creature even while unconscious, just how powerful one could possibly be? To prepare for this unlikeliest possibility, Wu Jincheol labeled this incident as top secret and made sure everyone involved would keep their mouths shut. This was also the reason why Song Jin Woo found himself in a hospital room all alone, as well as being looked after by some of the finest medical practitioners in the nation. Wu Jincheol's chest began beating real fast. Could Korea finally have a hunter on the level of an international powerhouse? There were less than 10 people in the entire world that could truly be described as a global powerhouse. But, what if Korea were to possess a powerhouse that were said to rival a nuclear warhead in terms of pure firepower? Of course, confirming the truth of the reawakening wasn't difficult at all. Didn't the wise elders once say to make hay while the sun still shines? Wu Jincheol signaled to his lackey. Bring it here. Then, the lackey went to the corner of the room and began rummaging through a briefcase placed there. That is. Before Jin Woo could finish his question, Wu Jincheol explained first. It's the device to measure your magic energy. He added that, although this device had been miniaturized, its efficiency or accuracy did not fall short of the actual full-size measuring device located in the Hunters Association. All you have to do is to place your hand on this magic crystal over here. On top of a circular plate, there was a fist-sized magic crystal embedded in the middle. Its color was pitch black, as if it was a black hole that wanted to suck him in. It was one of the highest quality magic crystals that cost as much as 1 billion won, not to mention that could only be found in monsters ranked A or higher. TL, almost $900,000. When Jinwoo stared at the magic crystal without saying anything, Wu Jincheol formed a dignified, serious expression and spoke up. "This is a necessary step during our investigation, so please, cooperate with us." Jinwoo nodded his head. If he indeed had undergone a reawakening, then his life would do a 180 in an instant. And they were going to test it out for him for free, so who was he to refuse? Jinwoo placed his hand on top of the black crystal and soon enough, warm rays of light oozed out from it. Cold sweat drops formed on the foreheads of Wu Jincheol and his lackey. SFX for a beam of light dissipating. Not too long after then, the light surrounding the crystal dissipated. Wu Jincheol hurriedly took off his sunglasses and confirmed the numbers. Right away, a small earthquake rocked Wu Jincheol's eyes. How can this be? He rechecked the numbers, but it remained the same. How could a person holding a hunter license possess the magic energy value of only 10? When considering the fact that the lowest average value for rank E, the bottom rank, was around 70 to 100, Song Jinwoo was no different from a regular person. Is it really a reawakening? If it is, what could be my new rank now? Jinwoo's hands were soaked in the sweat of anticipation. Seeing the suspicious reactions of the two monitoring division agents, the result must have been somewhat beyond their expectations. Meanwhile, Wu Jincheol was comparing the existing data on Jinwoo with the new measurement. His first measurement returned the value of 12. 4 years later, it's 10. It has decreased by 2, but it is within the margin of error. In other words, the magic energy measuring device was working fine. Instead, it was Song Jinwoo's magic energy that happened to be just illogically, nonsensically low. It was a miracle that he had survived until now. Wu Jincheol rapidly realized that being here was a waste of time, so he got up from his seat. "Let's go." "Yes, sir." Wu Jincheol and his lackey quickly packed up to leave. Excuse me. Can you tell me what is?" Just as Jinwoo was about to ask, Wu Jincheol bowed his head slightly. "Thank you for your cooperation. If you remember anything else, please give us a call anytime." As if their rear ends were on fire, 2 men in black rapidly left the room as soon as they put away the device. The hospital room that felt rather small suddenly became quiet and lonely. Jinwoo scratched the back of his neck. I guess that was a no, then. Well, if he thought about it, besides him feeling refreshed, there didn't seem to be any change to him at all. Even if he did go through a reawakening, it'd still be difficult for him to kill all those statue B** stars, anyways. Maybe, you might have a chance against them if you were either the ultimate weapon, Hunter Choi Jong-in, or the rank SS Hunter Go Gun-hui. Of course, him speculating like this was meaningless, since he had never seen them in action before. There was always a thick veil of secrecy draped over the hunters ranked S. They were more like clouds in the sky to him, actually. He thought up to here and inadvertently raised his head up. And that's when he saw it. Huh. He looked up without thinking, and then, saw words floating in the air. You have several unread messages. He closed his eyes and opened them again. You have several unread messages. The words remained floating up there without a single change. He shook his head hard a few times and even rubbed his eyes, but they were still there. Jinwoo massaged his aching forehead and lowered his head. It hadn't been a long time since I started hearing weird things, but now, I'm even seeing them, too. Could something in his head really be broken? There was a condition called PTSD, after all. People who experienced a huge accident or a traumatic event usually suffered from this condition. It was only a few days ago since he witnessed the deaths of many of his comrades, not to mention he himself nearly died as well, so it would not be so strange to hear or see weird things as a possible side effect. However, there were a couple of things that prevented him from dismissing this out of hand. Jinwoo's sight lowered to his leg. The leg that got cut in half by the shield of the stone statue was now all fine and dandy. The voice he heard out of the blue inside the underground temple hidden within the depths of the dual dungeon, his completely cured leg, and now, those words floating in front of his eyes. Too many weird things were happening all at once. What if? There was a chance that all these things were not isolated events but linked to one another. When his thoughts arrived here, his aching head felt just a bit clearer. Okay, fine. Jinwoo slowly raised his head. Once the confusion in his heart died down and he felt calmer, he became quite curious about the contents of those so-called unread messages. There might be answers to his questions found within those messages, after all. In order to confirm the messages, he reached out towards the words. And his hand simply went past them. It's not touch-operated. It seemed that he got way too used to how a smartphone worked. He couldn't think of any other way to access the messages other than tapping on the icon, though. While he was deliberating on the means to access the messages, he recalled the memories from the moments before he blacked out. Right. That happened. Back then, he could only get his intentions across to that unknown voice by talking to it. Just like back then, I should either form the words in my head or speak it out loud. Thinking that this must be the case, Jinwoo then began to mutter the potential combination of words one by one. Confirm. Messages. Confirm messages. Check messages. Reading. I want to read. I want to look. Hey, show me already, will ya? It was then. Just what is it that you wish to see that bad? He felt a cold, probing stare coming from the side, so he turned his head to look. And, spotted his little sister in her school uniform looking at him from the gap of the half-open door. Jinwoo became speechless. Her appa, busy glaring at the ceiling while demanding someone to show something to him, he simply didn't know how to explain this one to her.